The unemployment rate has decreased to 31.4% in the fourth quarter of 2025 from 31.9% in the third quarter. According to Statistics South Africa, the number of discouraged work seekers also fell by 233,000. Stats SA's quarterly labour force survey shows that construction, finance and community services created more jobs during the quarter. However, more jobs were lost in trade, mining and manufacturing. The Western Cape, Northern Cape and the Northwest, including Mpumalanga provinces, recorded the largest increase in employment in the fourth quarter. Gauteng saw the largest job losses, followed by KwaZulu-Natal. Stats SA also recorded a decrease in informal jobs. Right, to unpack the latest jobs data, I'm joined by Xhanti Payi, an economist at Inani Strategies. Good afternoon to you, Xhanti. Thank you so much for your time. Well, we've had a lot of good news and data over the last 12 to 18 months. The big and perhaps the most consistent question has essentially been, can South Africa turn the unemployment tide? We now learn that the unemployment rate has shown a slight decrease. In fact, as we look to our video wall in studio, we'll see that South Africa's official unemployment rate for the fourth quarter of 2025, 31.4%, down by 0.5%. What is your reaction to this latest news?
Sure. I think we have a mixed picture. I was listening to you just now saying that, we've seen a big decrease in discouraged job seekers. In fact, if we look at job seekers from the third quarter to the fourth quarter, we see that we actually have more discouraged job seekers, which means actually more people have now stopped looking for work or are discouraged or took a back seat and said to themselves, look, maybe this is too difficult, or, we've struggled for a while, maybe let me take a break. So a lot of people are sort of given up, and that's why we may see that number of the unemployment rate lower. But we also see something that is interesting, which is in the categories where we lost jobs. And I think that's where perhaps the biggest crisis is, in the sense that, we know that last quarter usually is a very good quarter for trade, right? Because that's where we are spending a lot of money, we are shopping. And it looks like we didn't do that in the last quarter, both year on year and continuously. So that is another big concern, in the sense that it tells us that people are still very, very under pressure in terms of their finances. And then, of course, we're also worried about mining. But it is important to note, though, that agriculture has done very, very well. Mm-hmm. It has done very well, even on a historical basis, where we're seeing long-term employment in the agricultural sector at its highest peak. So that's where we find some really, really good news.
So as you point to some of the highs and lows, I mean, it's a mixed bag, essentially, with South Africa's unemployment falling to its lowest level since 2020. For one, in the third quarter of 2025, we know that about 8 million South Africans were officially unemployed. As you also speak to discouraged job seekers, I mean, that was a 31.9% jobless rate. What do the new figures tell us about the fragility of the labour market, more so as more jobs were lost in those areas, trade, mining and manufacturing, that you made mention of?
Yeah, it really tells us an important story around, obviously, when we think about, some of the global issues that we found, have taken a bite in South Africa, especially perhaps when we think about, the US and some of the exports that we've had. But I think one of the key areas that we really should be concerned about, and I think one is always concerned, is that if you are looking at mining, which is a very good and important story for the South African economy, mm-hmm. we should be very, very concerned that we are losing. It's a place that's fragile. We see manufacturing has also been a very good place where we were advantaged, but as I said earlier, that may really be impacted by some of the troubles that we've had with the US, especially in terms of those trade tariffs. So that must have also affected us, and therefore it's something that we have to think about. But that actually we should be encouraged about the efforts that we've seen in agriculture and some of the work there, and that despite the pressure on the agricultural sector, we've seen more jobs, and that that's a place where we need to invest more energy be able to see that on the long-term basis.
As you speak about that pressure in the agriculture space, of course, you may be referring to the impact of what we're perhaps yet to see, the foot and mouth disease, and that impact not only on farmers, but on consumers alike. The price of beef, that is something that we continuously keep a close eye on.
Yes, certainly. That's exactly the point that, we've seen diseases coming into that sector and putting a lot of pressure on the agricultural sector. And that is something now that is going to affect farmers, certainly, no doubt, and then obviously exports and jobs in the sector. So it is something that we are looking at. We know, of course, that there is also a continuous problem that we're going to be facing now of climate change. And that's something that's going to be with us for a long time.
Community services, Xhanti, and construction hiring have driven the jobless rate to 31.4% in the fourth quarter. What are those figures indicative of as we consider the overall impact on household confidence?
You're quite right about that. The household has been under quite enormous pressure. And that number of the long-term basis tells you that that pressure continues, and it's really related, obviously, to employment, that if you see employment continue to be fragile as it is, of course, households, therefore, are affected by that employment, and they make choices accordingly because they are actually looking at themselves and thinking, what should we be doing in terms of actually that extra income? So the household continues to be under pressure, despite even some of the lower interest rates that we've seen over the past year.
At the same time, you spoke quite extensively about the impact of discouraged job seekers. We know that youth unemployment remains particularly alarming, above 60% if you look at the 15 to 24-year-olds who are out of work. And of course, painting a very bleak picture, pointing to what one may perhaps even term as a generational economic emergency. How can government and the private sector perhaps now bridge that gap? We heard quite a lot coming out of the State of the Nation address when President Cyril Ramaphosa spoke about the youth and jobs and the drives that are being put in place.
There's no doubt that employment really has to be first. We have to do something about investment in the key sectors that I've talked about. So we've got to invest, for example, in manufacturing. We've got to invest in new technologies. We've got to invest in agriculture. We've got to invest certainly in mining, especially this what we've now called critical minerals. And once that investment starts to take root, that's when we will see the need for more for more young people to get into employment, to get into training for the skills that are necessary. I went to a conference the other day that was on mining and mining skills, and it's quite clear that we have not done enough to identify a lot of the work that needs to be done in terms of investing in the sector so that we can actually create the jobs that we need. So it's important to think about what kind of investment is necessary to groom and to grow the sector. And once we've groomed and grown that sector, we're able then to be able to produce the jobs that we need. And this can be spoken about across various sectors.
Very well. Thank you so much for speaking to us there. Joined by Xhanti Payi, who's an economist at Inani Strategies, speaking about some of the uptick areas insofar as the job numbers are concerned. The agriculture sector showing a boost in that space.